Hello?
Hello.
Is this the intro you prepared for us, Roberta?
And welcome to the No Assembly Required podcast, a podcast where I talk about nothing with two charming women who also will drive you insane if you let them. And of course, now introducing your three hosts, your trio, Revenge of RedRomina. And your second host, Audrey the Assassin Ember. And your third and final host, the final boss of every level, the Dark Lord of the interwebs himself, Roberto Blake. Welcome to the No Assembly Required podcast, filmed in front of a live YouTube audience. No audience members will be harmed during the filming of this podcast, unless I feel like it. Please like and subscribe.
Wait, why did you call me an assassin?
Because tonight's theme is we live in a world where the villains have already won.
Wait, but why is an assassin necessarily a bad guy?
I said villain. I made no I did not impugn your character in any way. I said villain. Villain can be a stand-in for merely being the antagonist of a story.
Okay. Wait, I feel like, didn't we have a podcast where we kind of talked about this?
No, we hinted at it. We alluded to this topic. That's why this episode is we alluded to, well, what if they already have won?
Yeah, I think someone in the audience suggested, well, during that day, we actually took a lot of suggestions from the audience.
Yes.
And this was one of them, which, by the way, if you are listening and want to be a part of that, it's youtube.com/noassemblypod every Thursday at 8 p.m.-ish.
Yeah.
And this was just one of the things. I think we were talking about good versus evil and like what makes
a good guy.
Yeah,
we talked about that.
Good or bad.
I'm curious. Do you guys subscribe to the theory that it's possible that we live in a world where the villains have already won? And this is the aftermath of that.
What do you mean by won?
They won. They got what they wanted. They got theirs. They're like, hey, I had goals. I did whatever it took to achieve my goals, no matter the cost. I got mine. I'm good.
There's not one person who controls the whole planet. So I think
that's not necessarily what a villain may not want quote unquote world domination. But you could make an argument that if you decided to, let's say, in the world of like Spider-Man, for example, clearly what's painted as villainy is tech entrepreneurs, right? Well, if you look at it, tech entrepreneurs have clearly already won.
I feel like those tech entrepreneurs are like they were criminal. They were like stealing stuff and hurting people. So,
according to some people, our tech billionaires of right now, according to some people, are doing the same.
They're the villains.
They're the villains of the story, according to some people. So did they already win? And are we just living in the world that they've decided to allow us?
I think maybe some of them. For some of them, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's a mix. Like there definitely have been some wins from villains, but there's also, there has to be a balance.
Does there
good guys winning.
Balance to the force, Audrey?
I don't think it's even possible for there only to be like one, like only good guys or only villains to be winning.
I don't disagree with that. And the thing is, I'm not even saying that these people are bad people, but I would say that some people cast them in the role of villain, but I think that's subjective. In Batman, there was a point where Harvey Dent said you either die a hero or you live long enough for yourself to be painted as the villain. And so it's arguable that there are a lot of people that are right now just painted as villains, whether or not they actually are. I mean, and then villainy, or like, it's a matter of what was it they used to say in Star Wars? Well, from a certain point of view. Was it they say one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, right?
Right. I feel like hasn't this been covered in a number of films though? I feel like this was a cartoon. This was an animated film, but I can't remember which one it was. There's a very specific one. Oh, is that it? Is that the
You
one?
could think about it. Megamind, like, would be a comedic example.
Right, where he was set up as a villain, but he was actually
He was an underrated genius. His environment made him think that he was the bad guy or that like whatever, but he clearly had like left to his own devices and where he won. Think about it. Megamind won. He defeated Metro Man, and what did he do? He got rid of all the other crime. He got rid of all the litter and cleaned up. And he didn't really do anything other than like stroke his own ego and be very nice and kind and make the girl fall in love with him. Like that was basically
right.
like he showed who he was painted and casted as this villain, even to the point where he believed it, and then left to his own devices with, okay, you win. What did he do that was so maniacal and evil? Good things. Like, all right, I conquered the city. Man, the freaking like litter is like
but at
horrible.
what
Like
cost?
I'm clean this up to clean up this litter.
At what cost, though?
In his case, nothing. Like it's just that he just got to say evil one.
Now, what about in IRL? At what cost? Like,
in the real world, villainy is not grandiose. It's petty and it's self-serving, and that's and that would be the difference, is that it's petty and self-serving. Primary example of the villains winning. Let's use social media, for example. Who are the villains of social media?
Jake Paul.
Wow. There was
no hesitation. No hesitation right off the bat.
Work for the FBI? What's going on here?
Okay, but let's use. All right, fine. We'll just use the hypothetical example of Jake Paul. No shade to Mr. Paul, but let's be real.
We need no disrespect, Jake Paul. If you want to be a guest on our podcast, we'll totally have you.
I'm not sure I co-signed that. I don't know if I co-signed that. I don't need the clout.
I'll be the only host in that episode.
I don't need the clout that bad, guys.
I need to be able to roast him the entire time because
all right. Continue. With
Audrey the Assassin Ember, like coming for Mr. Paul.
Revenge, remember?
You're here for revenge. It's like it's
all
funny.
Right.
I'm the dark lord of the internet, and even I don't necessarily want to give Jake Paul a platform. Like, damn. But anyway, my point is, in all due respect to Mr. Paul, let's review. He would be
Audrey.
He would be considered the bad boy of YouTube.
Calling him Mr. Paul.
You can call him the bad boy of social media, and I don't think that that's an inaccurate.
Okay, I like that. Let's use that title. So
yeah, the bad boy of social media.
The bad boy of social media.
Yeah, he's the bad boy of social media, right? So like, if you think about it, though, what does that mean? It means that he's been able to do like, he's been able to do shenanigans and be a hooligan with very little in terms of repercussions, and his infamy, status, money, fame have all only been amplified by his bad behavior. And so you could make an argument that he has been rewarded for being the bad boy of social media, and you could make an argument for that means that the person that is cast in the role of villain here has won. He's gotten his heart's desires. He continues to achieve and to aspire to greater heights with nothing getting in his way, even himself. And that is what most people would want, what he has, but they're not able to achieve it while being noble.
Not if he's in jail. Why was the FBI at his
Here's
house?
the thing. Even with that, well, that has more to do apparently with his manager, which is a whole different story in terms of being covered, because his manager is actually a known, I wouldn't even give him the honorable moniker of villain. He's just a criminal. His manager is just a known criminal. And by that, I mean a known criminal in the sense he was a pimp. Like he was like a known pimp and drug dealer and like an actual criminal. We're not awarding him the prestigious title of villain.
Wow. Aside from the FBI going to his house, I have no idea.
They raided the manager's place too, so they were looking for the manager. They were looking for him. Now,
see, I don't know any of that because I actually have a life outside of social media. So,
well, I read our social media news sources because I have to actually be on top of this things for work purposes.
No,
Have to
that's
know these
okay.
things
It's
for work
great. You can
purposes.
fill me in.
Huh? Then I have a
great.
lot of friends who are social media reporters, so I have to be on top of this.
And you can fill me in.
Yeah, there is that.
Since
Let's
I've
serve at
just
the
about muted everything on social media.
Yeah.
And Audrey
Fair.
is on a 30-day...
Well, you've been productive as a result of that.
I don't know about productive. Today, I was working on my app the entire day, and I felt like I was just going around in circles, not doing anything.
Walking round in circles, walking
Making no
round in
progress.
circles.
Did you hit a roadblock or something? What happened?
Just going around in circles. It's just like, because I'm learning how to do a new thing. And so I feel like I don't have anything to show for it. And then I keep deleting stuff, and then stuff keeps breaking. And I'm just, and I feel like an idiot because I put something in, and then I'm like, why isn't this working? Or I just flat out don't know how to make a thing work. Yet it feels like it's the most basic thing. Like it's something that I should just know.
You should take a page from the supervillain's manual, be single-minded and ruthless in your agenda, do this thing to the exclusion of everything else, and when and if it fails, simply connive someone into doing the work for you and then taking all the credit. That is the path of villainy.
All right.
But it works.
But
And by the way, for anybody who cannot read or hear fluid sarcasm, for those of you who don't speak fluid sarcasm, /S, I'm not suggesting that that's something someone should actually do, although historically there's a very good track record of people doing that, including Edison, who, yes, I'm throwing some shade at Edison, while still benefiting from all of his accomplishments stolen by others, because I like having electricity and such. So, yes,
Wow.
I'm going to hypocritically shade Thomas Edison while benefiting from all of what he did. So, there you have it.
/S.
/S. Sort of.
/SS.
Yeah. Like, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's always that, right? Oh, I did hear there was this guy who his company caught him because he was making like 6 figures and outsourcing his work to someone. He lives in the UK or something like that. Or maybe it was China. I mean, I have no idea where he actually lived, but he was making like 6 figures, and he outsourced all of his work without the company knowing, and was just on Netflix and playing video games and just hanging out in his house and collecting his paycheck.
Which I don't necessarily approve of, but I do. I'm impressed. I don't approve. I don't condone.
I am also impressed. I'm also impressed. I mean, how do you go unnoticed? Because one of the things is if you're working remote, you're probably working for a software company. That's
I think he should have been promoted. That's kind
of like a majority, is that if you are working remote, you're most likely working in some kind of software or something like that. So if you are, you would think that they would be able to track where their employees are logging in to do their work if they need to log in.
Even by doing that, though, they themselves could, by doing so or attempting to do so, they themselves can open themselves up to a security vulnerability. So it's better to just use the honor system, to be honest. Not to mention that creates another bottleneck in terms of you then have to trust the person who's supposed to be monitoring an employee to actually be bothered to be doing that instead of them just collecting.
Not so much monitoring, but they still know who is accessing the websites.
Yes,
if they
you realize that you have to trust somebody to actually review check-ins and server logs and all of those things. Not to mention, by the way, some could write a macro to fake all of that anyway. It's just people do it and people do monitor that. You're not wrong. I've worked for a company that did this kind of thing before, and it's just so much hassle to actually do and to actually enforce it. And then you have to trust the admins who are doing the security to do their job and not to just write a macro to pretend to do their job or to trust them to, you know what I'm saying? It's you have to watch the watchmen. And it's just, at the end of the day, it just becomes more expensive and more, do we trust our people or we don't? And the thing is, my big thing though is the work got done. I'd probably am like, I don't like that you lied to me or that you faked it or whatever. I'm going to reprimand you for that. I'm going to eliminate your position, and now I'm going to move you into the position of solving other logistics and productivity problems because, great, you're a lazy person. You'll figure out the most expedient way to get it done.
Or just move them to HR because clearly they're very good at finding
something like that. I mean, maybe not HR.
Someone else to do the job.
Maybe not HR, but literally I would put them in a position where their whole thing is to streamline everything in the laziest, like by like get it done. Because like you're a lazy person, you'll figure out the best way to still get this thing done with the least amount of effort. So like,
now,
great. That's your superpower.
Does this make him a villain?
Ish. Like, I mean, from the point of view of from a certain point of view, from the point of view of his employer, from the point of view of the earnest, hardworking employees who showed up and did their job as they were told to do, from the point of view of somebody looking at why did he get to have the same salary as me for a year, not have to actually put in the work, so on and so forth, that person would cast him as a villain, even though nothing bad happened to them. They just feel slighted and cheated, and nothing bad happened to them. And as for the employer, yes, they were lied to, they were betrayed in a way, but the work still got done. And you didn't notice, which means your own incompetence is more at fault. The fact that this person took advantage is one thing, but your own incompetence that you didn't catch it sooner after a whole, a year? That's on you, homie, and you should take some responsibility there. So, I mean, it's hard to, in my opinion, it's hard as like, all right, who am I really, who am I mad at here? Am I mad at this dude for getting his work done? And so it's not like he took money for nothing. The work did get done. He just outsourced it. He did something wildly practical. The people still got what they paid for, just not from him directly. And nothing bad happened to the other coworker just because they weren't smart enough to figure it out. So I'm trying to understand that beyond the, well, it wasn't honest. I'm trying to understand what the actual quote unquote problem here is besides the dishonesty. And it's like, that's my only issue is like, okay, you were less than honest. It's like, how mad am I?
That makes him a villain.
I guess. I mean, if that's what it takes, I mean, then everybody's a villain at some point.
What do you think, Audrey?
Yes.
And while you're thinking of a more elaborate answer to my question,
I missed the first part where you're explaining what he did wrong. So that's where I'm.
Okay, so he was hired for a job. He was working at this company where he was making like six figures a year. But he outsourced all of his work, so he actually never did any of the work, and he just outsourced it to somebody else to do it for cheaper.
Well,
while he just was hanging out, watching Netflix and playing video games.
I mean, is that against? What type of job is it? Is it like I feel like
it's a remote work job?
Well, let's just say he was a developer. Let's just say he was working on software.
I mean, I guess they hire you for you. But at the same time,
they didn't notice for a year.
If they didn't, I don't know. Like, is it in the contract somewhere where they say you can't outsource anything?
Probably. It probably is. To be real with you, it probably is. So yeah, there's a breach of contract and a breach of trust. But it's not like he literally took their money and didn't deliver. He just didn't it's like, oh, the work got done. I didn't do it, but it got done.
It was the same
and you didn't notice for a year, and they weren't unhappy with it. They weren't unhappy with the results.
I feel like if I were the employer, I'd kind of just, if I didn't notice for a year and it was the same quality work,
maybe my L.
Hire the people that he was freelancing.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, assuming you could figure out who that, assuming it got that far. There was another employee that did something similar. He wrote a program to eliminate his job, and they didn't catch him for 2 years, and he was collecting a check the entire time. They fired him, and then I think they tried to sue him. I don't know if they had succeeded, but I'm like, I wouldn't have taken it so far as to suing him. I would have literally at that point hired him to scale and adapt the technology, and I'd want to own the technology that eliminated his job, and I would be like, and
he still technically did the job. He just made a tool to do it for him. Like
I know
made
that's
the
what pisses
rules.
me
He
off, that
did-
they got mad. They were so indignant. Like that company was so indignant about it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
because it was like, you're not physically going and reading the meters. Because it was a water meter thing. It was like he wrote an app that accurately, and it eliminated waste. It accurately did his job, and he didn't have to do it for like 2 years. I'm like, he automated it. He made this technology that you as a company didn't even see fit to do, to make this thing simpler, that could have reduced your cost,
Wow.
like and eliminated more jobs like his. And it was accurate, and like literally he was getting like commendations as an employee for like his speed and accuracy on everything, because of like how efficient he was. And then they found out that he made a machine do it, and then they were mad. And I'm like, how the hell? Like, promote this guy, put him into R&D,
Right?
put, like,
or
and
invest in the app and
own the
scale it.
technology.
Yeah. I
You can't get
mean,
mad at someone if they did the job and they just tricked you. Like that's kind of on you.
They
I
didn't.
think.
Oh, but you didn't do it manually, and you didn't do it the hard way, and you didn't put in a day's labor, and like.
He just cheated the system. Like that's
And the thing is, no one was cheated. They were rewarded with better results.
yeah.
so it sounds like, so would you say that someone who cheats the system is a villain?
No.
In the eyes of people who didn't benefit by cheating the system, or use it, or like, not even cheating, but playing the game properly, or getting ahead, or, using the system to their advantage, like people who, but you did it the different way, or the easy way, or you took a shortcut, or whatever. Those people, nothing bad happened to them, because they were fine with the way they did things, because they were like, oh, I did it this way, and yeah. And then when you don't have to do that and you get the same results, then they are mad, and nothing bad happened to them. They weren't clever enough to do what you did, and they are mad. And then people who didn't they didn't say you couldn't do that, and there was nothing to stop you, and then you did it that way, and they had different expectations, but they really said, oh, results are all that matter. Everyone says results are all that matter. And then when you say, all right, fine, I got the results, I got the answer, I did the thing, I provided the solution, I just didn't do it the way you expected, then they want to act like something's up. So I think that there's part of like projecting and casting people in the role of villain, or saying they did something wrong, in many cases where you just are like trying to punish them because you weren't clever enough, or you weren't talented enough, or good enough, or it didn't occur to you to take the path that they took, and now you're mad. I just feel like it's salt.
How would you
Salty
compare that
rednecks.
to like cheating on a test? Would you say that the cheaters who were able to like trick the
It depends on what.
deserve?
Well, it depends on the methodology that we're talking about. Because here's the thing. Well, it's not about what's cheating. Because cheating itself is one thing. Because like we're talking about. All right. I'll give you an example of what you're talking about. So I was dating this girl, and she was going to take the GRE because she was getting her post grad, right? Mm-hmm. And she couldn't understand for the life of her how me, Mr. Community College dropout, when I was helping her and keeping her company, and we were doing the practice exams, she was like, how is it you keep getting like a higher and a passing mark and like an almost perfect score on vocabulary? And I'm sitting here with my memorization cards, and I've been trying for this. How is it that you keep doing this? How do you keep outscoring me on this, right? And then I was like, oh, it's simple. And she was like, well, what does this word mean? And I'm like, I have no idea. She was like, but you got it right on the test. What are you doing? And I was like, do you really want me to show you this, or are you going to be upset? And she was like, no, just tell me. I was like, I'm using deductive reasoning to get the right answer without having to know the right answer. I'm eliminating the wrong answers. I don't have to know what that word is. You can't possibly memorize all these words. It's impossible, and it's impossible for you to know the meaning of every word that you could possibly encounter for all the combinations of the test. So instead of playing the game that way, because you're just trying to outwit everybody else by like say, oh, I can memorize the most, you're trying to like beat some theoretical version of the game that you can't possibly win. I decided to examine the rules and mechanics of the game, and I figured out how to play the system. And so what I told her I did was I looked at the sentence structure and I looked at the rules of the English language to eliminate the answers that don't work. And at a bare minimum, I can always do this to reduce it down to a minimum of a 50-50. If I cannot absolutely get the answer with a guarantee, I always have a 50-50 chance. And so when you have always only a 1 out of 4 chance, and I have a 1 out of 2 chance every single time, I will always get ahead of you because there's no getting around it. You only have a 25% chance of succeeding 100% of the time. Half of the time, I'm only having it 50-50. I'm always going to outscore you on this if I keep doing it my way. You keep trying to do it the hard way. And like, she ended up using it and getting higher scores, but she was really angry initially that I didn't have to actually memorize things and know the answer to get the answer.
But that's not cheating, though.
It is to some people. I think
I didn't have to know the answer to be correct.
Right. Well, I
didn't have to actually legitimately memorize and work as hard to get a better outcome. And that was,
here's the thing. When you're doing like the reading comprehension section in the SATs, anybody who actually, studied for the SATs knows that you don't actually read the essay that they put there. You just go to the questions and then look for the answers in the text. And
Context
so
clues,
so instead of like sitting there reading for 30 minutes, you go straight to the questions and you only spend 15 minutes doing the reading comprehension part. So that's like, to some people, that's cheating because you figured out a tactic of doing it a different way. Now that's just one form of cheating. Obviously, another form is
literally
someone gave you the answers and you copied them down. That's
being more clever.
Definitions of cheating.
Well, no,
like,
it's like
cheating would be like bringing notes and writing it on the bottom of your shoe versus like.
No, and I agree. That is my version of it too. But I'm just saying because of the
other people
set up earlier.
Other people superimpose. If you didn't have to do what I did to get the same results, then you must have cheated or you had an unfair advantage. And therefore, if you have an unfair advantage over me, then you are wrong and you should forfeit your unfair advantage. Even if it means you lose to me or even if it means not getting what you want, you should operate at the same disadvantages that I have or it's not fair, which is bullshit. So but that's people's subjective view of what morality is. People's subjective rule of morality is for things to be fair, you have to operate from the same baseline as them, even if you didn't come by your advantage by a truly nefarious or sinister or malicious way. If you have an advantage at all, you, to be good and to be pure and to be noble and to not be a villain, must forfeit your advantages.
Now,
I would compare. Sorry.
What?
No, I would compare.
I was going to ask you a question.
The program to like do his work for him to like what Roberto you were talking about, or Romina with the like skipping to the end. Like I would compare that to that sort of thing, not like cheating. It's just a different way of
using your intelligence.
Yeah.
Right. And I would
which
compare
other
it to that
people
too.
apparently didn't have, and therefore you're evil.
Right. But you were just saying, but the reason that we brought that up before is because you had asked about cheating on a test and you made the comparison and you said, well, does that equate? Like,
yeah. So I guess when I meant cheat,
so what happens? Because if this guy is allowed to have, get a job and then either pay someone else to do his job for him for cheaper or make an app to do the job for him, like, how is that okay? But then cheating or bringing notes to a class, to a test, that's not okay. So
here's the thing.
Was that your question, Audrey? Like more or less? Because that's what I had understood was your question. That's why I went off on that.
Yeah, I think I was just trying to see if you thought that the cheating on a test was the same as the dude who like made.
Let me ask you this, Audrey. Is paying someone else to do your book report wrong?
Like, what do you mean? What sort of like
if you're in a school or you're in a class, and let's say it's not high school or anything like that. Let's say you just say
who wrote it and you're turning it in as your own. Oh, okay. This is starting to get complicated.
I mean, explain to me. All right, you were assigned a project. You were assigned a project by your teacher and your instructor. This project it results in a grade. An evaluation and a grade is a result. Because here's the thing. Everyone here as an adult knows that grades have nothing to do with how smart you are or even what you know or even your capacity to apply what you've learned. It's just a evaluative score. It's just a result that they hold over you, right? We know it has nothing to do with nothing, right? So in real world terms, grades don't have consequences in real world terms in terms of anything truly meaningful. So let me ask you something. If you're giving a project, whether it's a book report or a lab or whatever it is, and you pay somebody else to do that, I'm not asking whether it's honest, quote unquote. I'm asking whether it's wrong to pay somebody a good wage to do your work for you. Something they agreed upon, you did a transaction, and then it was work for hire, which means the work is your property. It is your work. By legal definition, you have the ownership of the materials that you're turning in. So it is your work. You just didn't do it.
So normally,
so legally speaking, and by the way, I could argue this in front of a committee. That's like, it was work for hire. The contract states it was work for hire, which means that all of these materials and all this work becomes my property.
With his little book report.
Yeah.
So it becomes my property.
Like,
if it's my property,
legally my property.
It's my intellectual property. It's my
I paid the kid next door $5 to do it. It's mine.
It's my intellectual property. So the thing is, turning it in under my name is legally valid and permissible because if you hire a ghostwriter to write your book for you,
ghostwriter?
If you hire a ghostwriter to write to work for hire contract, it's a work for hire contract, and you have an NDA, you legally are allowed under a publishing contract to print that with your name on it.
Hold on. Wait a second.
There's a difference though between
What's the difference? Because at that point you're charging money for a book with your name on it. You're charging money for a book with your name on it and claiming it to be yours, and it's legally permissible to do.
All right. I'm gonna make it super simple and very tied to real life. And by real life, I mean adult life. Hiring a ghostwriter. You've written a book. It says that the author is Audrey Ember, but who actually wrote the book? Some 40-year-old lady that you hired who lives in Missouri, and you paid her $10,000 to write the book for you. But sitting on the bookshelves is a book written by Audrey Ember. So this is something that happens every day. This is a real thing. Now,
in tech, a CEO gets to put their name on the building and everything, regardless of all the people who did the work.
I'm making an analogy here. Hold on a second. All right, so we have this thing that's actually happening, right? Ghostwriters. People are writing other people's books. Now, compare that to a 16-year-old who hires some other 16-year-old somewhere else, or maybe even a 23-year-old college student who's just trying to make some extra cash, hires them to write a book report for their English class in high school. Is that right or wrong? What do you think about that, Audrey?
Well, okay, I think there's a difference of circumstance. Like for the book, you're the one who's in school, you're getting a qualification to prove yourself or prove
School proves then, and how's that worked out and translate in the real world? Like you get good grades, it matters.
Are you not trying to prove yourself by having your book published too? Why
Not to
are you
mention
publishing a book and putting it on a bookshelf?
And everyone's expectation, by the way, when they hand out money, when they buy that book, they have the expectation.
What did you say, Audrey? I can't hear you over.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you for calling me out on that, by the way.
No, but like with the book, I guess the difference between like writing a book and getting a credential, like a degree or something, the degree you're like, it's for you. So it's something that you're like, you go through steps to like make sure that you are qualified for the degree. So I think it's important to do it yourself because that's like the qualifications that they need for. I don't agree with it completely, but that's just how it is.
What about
like that's your own thing?
Are we going to suggest that people even in leadership roles are qualified for the job? Like think about it. Do you to be the head of an IT company, do you even need to be qualified? Do you even need to code? Do you even need to code? Because I'll be real with you. The previous CEO before Marissa Mayer was a CEO of Yahoo, faked all of his credentials. And I think we can all look at the results that he produced at Yahoo with all of his fake credentials and not having his degree. And then what happened to Yahoo after he left and after they installed a new CEO. No offense to Marissa Mayer, but like she was qualified, quote unquote, overqualified even. And I give her all of that. I have nothing against her, but Yahoo has performed worse under her tenure than her predecessor who faked all his credentials. The only real major flaw in his tenure was that he got into arguments with a member of the board who led a campaign to get rid of him, and it never worked until he was able to figure out that he faked his credentials. The only thing he could dig up to undermine this guy is, you faked your credentials. And that was it. He couldn't get him on performance. He couldn't get him on legal things. He couldn't do anything but say, you faked your credentials. But the results stood with the board until that, which means it didn't really, in terms of producing a result or an outcome, didn't seem to really matter. But the integrity aspect of it, which I don't disagree with entirely, but if we're talking about results, it's like, oh, I hired somebody with integrity who did a worse job, and the guy who, because he had to jump through these hoops to meet our elite demands, was actually doing better, but he wasn't part of the club. He wasn't part of the elite. He didn't go to an Ivy. He didn't go to an Ivy, so it doesn't matter what results he produced because he shouldn't be here because he shouldn't have been allowed in the country club.
By the way, speaking about results and joining the club, you can join our club by leaving us a rating.
So, like, I understand people's argument of saying the whole thing breaks down when you say dishonest, but like in transactions, let's think about
leave us 5 stars.
Yes, please do.
Subliminal messaging.
But Audrey, when we're talking about the ghostwriting, the publishing thing, when we buy a book, we feel like we're buying it from that person, and we feel we're buying that person's work, and we're making a cash transaction. There's not a cash transaction happening when you're qualifying with as a 16-year-old kid or even a college kid, turning in that work, that assignment. And so, I mean, like, how is it from a practical application standpoint? What is, in fact, the difference? Because I would think that it's more egregious to say, I bought something with the expectation that it was you. Now, legally, you didn't defraud me. You didn't legally defraud me. And your name is on it, but you didn't really write it. So, like, that's, I think, a bigger, quote unquote, more egregious form of dishonesty that we find legally permissible than paying someone to write your homework.
I mean, yeah, I agree that the ghostwriter thing, I personally feel like if you write the book or you don't, you should just tell them, like, there's nothing wrong with it as long as you're clear with that. But I think the problem with like the school thing is it's more about the system of school rather than like the whole cheating or not cheating. I wish it wasn't so black and white with school and university. Like, obviously,
I feel like my biggest thing with that would be the disadvantage towards kids who don't have access to money. I mean, they would have to have the know-all. They would have to have that, the ability to go and do work, to get a side job, to get, an after school job, to do something like that, to make the cash in order to pay for that. But at that point, like, it's they're just breaking even, probably.
Doesn't
like,
that
what's the
prove my
point of-
thesis? Doesn't that prove my thesis that we live in a world where the villains have already won? Because again, if you take the hard, earnest path of long suffering and you don't use your cunning or your guile or your cleverness, or you don't think your way out of it by working the system to your advantage, and you don't use that to make up for your disadvantages or to add to advantages you already have, how do you ever beat someone who doesn't have those scruples, or is like saying, well, it may be less than honest, but it's not illegal or it's not against the rules, so I'll do it anyway. Think about it like this. Harry Potter in the books and in the movies, Harry Potter often used cleverness and cunning and guile and didn't exactly completely break the rules as much as bend them to have an advantage over people who, in many cases, they didn't have that, they didn't think of that, or they didn't have the luxury, or they didn't have the extra pass of being the chosen one or being favored by the administration. How many times did Harry Potter only get ahead because of his legacy, his name, his infamy, all of these advantages he had, but he's heralded as being a good guy, but again, from a certain point of view, because there's a lot of people who didn't like him.
He broke all of the rules. He broke.
But
so
he
many
didn't
rules,
always get
too.
caught. And so it's the thing is, oh, you can
Yeah.
break the rules if you don't get caught. That's a part of the lesson of, well, if you victor's justice. From a certain point of view, you could argue that Harry Potter was the villain. In fact, that's the argument of Snape, is that James Potter, who is heralded as such a good and decent man, in fact was a bully, and in fact was an elitist, and in fact was even prejudiced himself toward muggles and toward halflings. So from a certain point of view, this man that Harry grew up, never knowing but worshiping, James Potter,
Right.
was not a good dude, but he was perceived as one. Snape was perceived as being cantankerous and evil and all of these things, but Snape was more noble than James.
Yeah.
Right. Juanfer in the chat says, for me, the difference is that the school doesn't really want a book report. What they want is for you to read the book. What do
If you
guys
can
think about
accomplish
that?
the same thing, though, in the real world, though, I know that's what the school wants, but if they don't even know that you did that, though, they'll go ahead without knowing that. They would praise you for the result that you produced, right?
Right. And then I think also, what difference does it make whether they read the book or not? I mean, obviously it's nice to be cultured and stuff, but there's so many books that you probably read in school that I wasn't required to read, and so on. So it's like, what difference does it make,
I
if I
didn't
had
pay
gone to
people
another
to do mine.
school, maybe I wouldn't have been required to read that book,
Yeah, I didn't pay people to do my book reports, by the way. I was the guy who was paid.
Right.
So that's why you're arguing this.
Well, partly, but think about it. I did that to make up for my economic disadvantages. So I used the system to balance out my quote unquote disadvantages. I used being clever and being cunning and used my wits in a way that was unconventional. And yeah, it may have broken or bent some rules, but the result is that the result still plays out. And the thing is, in the real world, that's how it actually works and happens. Somebody who does it the hard way for the sake of doing it the hard way, or doing it the way that they're expected to do, or doing it the way they're told to do, that produces an inferior result or doesn't get the job done, doesn't get a pat on the back for doing it and going about it the right way. But even if you accomplish the goal, even if you don't go about it exactly the right way or the correct way, but you get the results and everything like that, a lot of times, not in the instances we brought up earlier, but in a lot of cases, people look the other way, or you'll even get promoted for it, or you'll benefit, or you'll prosper. And in the real world today, again, we can look at all the wonderful, non-problematic influencers of the world. We can look at all of the wonderful people who do amazing things, and who continues to get media spotlight and infamy and fame and all of these things and attention. Mr. Paul.
Yeah.
Mr. Paul and other people.
He has another name.
We need to give him a nickname.
The bad boy of the internet.
The bad boy, well, the bad boys and the bad girls, to be balanced here, the bad boys and the bad girls of the internet. We're not going to sit here and name a bunch of names or rattle off a list of people that, can then put us on their enemies list. But like, you know that there are plenty of people that are simply rewarded for being outlandish, controversial, offensive, you know, and they rally, and people financially and lend power to them in the support that they give them with their following and their counts and stuff like that, for the spectacle of them just rebelling.
Todd in the chat says, it's wrong to put a degree on your resume you are not actually awarded. And many universities have code of conduct around doing your own work.
I agree. I'm mostly playing devil's advocate here. I agree 100% that it's wrong to misrepresent yourself. What I'm saying is that we live in a society where even that, if you check certain boxes, seems to not have what you would consider to be proportionate consequences. And it only does when those consequences usually come from outrage or outcry from the general public. Because we all have known, and it's been a joke and a cliche for decades, that the rich and the elite were just buying their way into Ivy League schools that they never could have achieved through merit. We all knew that for decades.
Right.
And only when there was public outcry did it literally, centuries. Only through public outcry and disenfranchisement did it become literally a federal case. It didn't become a federal case until the court of public opinion and the outrage, and then until the media decided to run with it because they could. It literally took centuries for that to be a federal case. Yet it's been an unwritten rule of our society for longer than any of us have been alive.
Right.
And that's my point, is like, we do live in a society where essentially the villains have already won. And like, if you really think about it.
I definitely agree that you shouldn't be, you shouldn't pretend to be something that you're not.
I agree with that 1,000%.
And that's ultimately what you're doing when you do that. But
I think that we've literally created, go ahead.
I just think that if you do find a way to do something more efficiently and more effectively, and even if it subtracts you from the equation, I don't see anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I don't think I've never believed that people should be anything but who and what they are. But the thing is, I believe that we have a society that rewards the opposite of that in too many cases for it to not be a choice of a rational actor. If
it makes it
get what I'm saying?
Right. It makes it difficult because, for example, the guy who did the app for the water meter, he found a solution to a problem, and it was a more effective and more efficient way of doing it.
Yeah.
But he was punished for it. Ultimately.
Yeah. And by the way, I stand corrected on something. Todd is making an excellent point here. He said he worked under both CEOs and under Yahoo, and he says Marissa was a better CEO than Scott. And I'll accept that, and I stand corrected since he's a good source on that. And I'll just say that she probably is a better CEO. And that wasn't the argument I was making. I was arguing that results sometimes, because the thing is, you can be a good CEO, and I see this a lot in tech, by the way. You can be a good CEO and the company could still be performing less under you for any number of reasons. And that's more the point I was making. It was more of a hypothetical, but he would know much better than I, and anybody who worked in those companies and works in that space would know better than I. But even let's say it's hypothetical, and let's not use Marissa and Scott as the example here, but I see too many times that a overly qualified person, I mean, not with, like, let's not even use it with, like, it's in a non-political context, but in a situation where you have somebody who's worked in the realm of politics, like, let's say, again, 2016 election, Hillary Clinton. And then you have an outsider, whether it's Donald Trump or anyone else, someone who's never served in the military, someone who's never served in public office, someone who's never been a part of government, is not more qualified than someone who has been a part of government. And so you have a situation where here's where it's not political. And this is my point. Donald Trump had spectacle and had the ability to completely speak freely and act in the way that a villain does. A villain can act with absolute conviction and say whatever they think and whatever they mean without consequences. And in the case of someone, let's say an independently wealthy billionaire or millionaire, You can say whatever you want your whole life because who's going to really offer you consequences? You're playing by a set of rules wherein there's no one to really, who has a power level equal to you to hold you accountable? Well, nobody.
Elon Musk.
But if you're, well, yeah, Elon Musk, for example, he can say whatever he wants with impunity, essentially, for the most part.
Right.
But when you're independently powerful like that, there's no accountability, right? Because who has a power level, consequences can only be delivered from a place of power. When you have that much power, where are the consequences? Especially if you're not in a position where you care about what people generally think of you, or what they generally think of you can't dramatically impact your life in some way. Now take, for example, a different tact here, and you have somebody who has been not in that position their entire life of privilege, but is now privileged, but has also had the scrutiny and the magnifying glass of being held accountable and answering to committees and working within a system. That person is at a disadvantage to an outsider because they have to speak in measured, calculated tones, and they've frankly been groomed to be fake because they've been groomed to say what is permissible for their circumstances. Someone who's been an outsider and been independently powerful can say whatever they want and therefore presents as more authentic even when they're being bad. Jake Paul presents as authentic even when he's being bad. Someone who is an influencer who tries to behave appropriately and measured and be generally liked is always at the disadvantage of looking like a hypocrite by stating themselves to be good rather than just having to be less disappointing than usual.
Right.
So again, you have somebody like Jake Paul versus someone like Jenna Marbles. Jenna Marbles really can't win in that situation when Jake Paul can just say, you like me or you hate me, and I'm going to live my life and I'm going to do me, because then he has absolute freedom. Jenna doesn't want to hurt anybody, so she's restricted by the rules of I don't want to do anything offensive or I don't want to do anything hurtful. Somebody who's
because
not
everybody
playing
can
by
get
this,
offended or hurt.
somebody not operating by the same rule book, whether it's a technical rule book or a moral framework, it's very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult for them to win against somebody who doesn't have scruples, is the point that I'm making. And I think that we may live, in fact, in a world that lends too much of an advantage to people without scruples. And I think that you see a society where those people are winning, where people who don't operate by the same moral fabric or framework that most of us are operating in distinctly have that advantage.
Because they don't have the same limitations.
Yes, because that's an excellent point. They don't have the same limitations. They can push envelopes. They can push buttons. They are willing to risk making enemies. They have a higher risk, higher reward. They can,
but also because they've chosen that path as well.
They've chosen that path and they accept the consequences of that. But the thing is, the irony is that there's less consequences because the thing is, it's harder to. If you have to choose an opponent, do you choose an opponent with no limits, or do you choose an opponent who has some kind of moral code so that there's rules that you can, you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
Do you go into a duel with someone just as likely to shoot you the moment you turn your back, or do you go with the person who you know has the strictest moral code in the universe and would never dishonor themselves?
What have you to say about that, Audrey?
I don't know. I mean, in that specific instance, I feel like the person with the high moral code would know that the dishonest person would probably not honor it, so they might.
The samurai knew even when the samurai held to their code even when they knew their enemies wouldn't, and that was a whole thing. They were willing to die before being dishonored, so they wouldn't change their standard no matter what their enemy did.
It's pretty intense.
That's what a code of ethics is, though. It's not for when it's convenient. If you have a code of ethics or standards or morals or what have you, it's not fluid at all. It's not fluid. It doesn't shift when the sand does. It's something that is essentially carved into stone. It's meant to be unmovable. And that rigidness often puts you at the mercy of people that are not nearly as rigid unless you're just that good. And by good, I mean able to produce results. You'd have to literally be twice as good, 5 times as good, 10 times as good to maintain being good. And that's why being good is harder. And that's why it's considered the more challenging thing to do, because it literally is.
Sad truth.
Think about all the
Sad
advantages in
truth.
Harry Potter. Think about all the advantages that you have in Harry Potter by going the route that, say, Voldemort goes down. Like, think about why he was he who shall not be named. Like, think about why he struck terror into the hearts of people. Like, he had all these advantages because there was nothing he wasn't willing to do in order to win. And if you are not willing to go that hard, if you're not willing to do that, it's not that it makes you weak. It's that it means that you literally, to overcome somebody with no limits, would have to be multiple times more powerful than them, because the fact that they have no limits, and that they also may have, based on those lack of limits, more ingenuity or cunning, because they don't have to operate in this rigid framework. They have more options available to them. They have more options available to them, possibly more resources available to them. And it's very difficult for you to anticipate somebody if you can't conceive of doing what they would do. It's very hard to counter them.
It's essentially the Wild West in terms of there being no laws. And if there are no laws, then anything goes. And if anything goes, then the opportunities are limitless.
Do you
as
know
opposed to if you have structure. Because if you have structure, which is what you're saying essentially, is I've decided, for example, to make a YouTube channel, and my YouTube channel, I'm not going to say any bad words, and I'm going to limit the kind of content in order to make it family friendly, right? You've already set these restrictions for yourself, and you're working under a very specific structure so that every time you do a video, you're checking off this list of things, of criteria that it meets, right? But if you're working under no laws and anything goes, then you definitely have more freedom and more opportunities available.
Todd brings up a good point. Should we focus more on putting the honorable people on a pedestal than putting so much attention on the human train wrecks? And you would think the answer should be obviously yes, but why do you think that we don't? Audrey, I'd like to hear from you on this one first. What's that?
Because a lot of the time, the people who are the train wrecks are more interesting because people like to watch train wreck. Like, it's entertainment. It's kind of like, I don't know. It's like,
I think I made a tweet about this, that some people would rather watch the train crash than watch the tracks being laid.
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good point. They would rather watch a train wreck than watch the track be built. Yeah.
Right. And I think, I mean, I do agree. There is definitely a, well, the chat right now is talking about cancel culture, and there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that can go into that conversation.
I just don't believe a true villain can be canceled because, again, a true villain doesn't have scruples. You could look at anybody from many of the people like Jake Paul, Tana Mojo, Jeffree Star. You could look at just these 3 examples, right? It's impossible to cancel them because they won't stop doing what they're doing. They won't change. They won't, clearly they won't. They might evolve, they might adapt, but they won't change fundamentally in the sense of they've built their brand on shenanigans. They're not going to change or give up that status and all the things that come from it or the fan base that comes from it per se. They'll just evolve and adapt with the times to be acceptable enough to not be disavowed, but they'll take heat in spurts of it and so on and so forth. I mean, if you look at people who have been canceled, for real been canceled, have they done nearly the things that Jake Paul has done? I mean, didn't Jake Paul essentially use his social media agency as a casting couch and use it by promising and dangling the carrot of being on Team 10 to sleep with Instagram models. I believe that's my understanding of the situation of what happened, and that's what his two ex-girlfriends said, right? That's some Harvey Weinstein level shit right there, and he's still going on and about his business. Jeffree Star, I don't even want to touch that. Tana, for all of her shenanigans and like going as far as being such a irresponsible person as to put her mugshot on a t-shirt.
It gets to a point where, so it's like if you want to go to a restaurant and your friend tells you, or someone just tells you, oh no, I found like a piece of dust, like a fuzz in my soup the last time that I went. Don't go there. Mm-hmm. Chances are you might ignore them and are just gonna be like, nah, like I love the chicken wings at this place. Like I'm gonna go there, right?
Yeah.
So you still go there, but then like two more friends tell you, and then like suddenly like they found like a roach, and then suddenly there's like Yelp reviews. Like it gets to a point where it escalates, and if there are enough people that complain about the one thing, like what happened with the Me Too movement, it eventually falls apart for some people.
Not for some people, but not the far majority. I mean, no matter how many, even if it's millions of people that complain about something or someone.
Well, it has to be big enough. I feel like.
Sure.
I think the volume of it. We're in a different world now.
Look at Roy Moore from Alabama. Roy Moore was running in Alabama. He lost by 1%, even though he literally himself said that, well, yes, that girl was underage, but I got her parents' consent. That doesn't make it better, homie. It's like this is a politician that almost won the governorship of Alabama, and he lost by 1%. 1% of the voting electorate of that state decided that they could overlook him having a track record and women coming forward and him having a penchant for, as a 30-year-old judge, doing a lot of things with underage girls or borderline underage girls. They could overlook all of that and testimony from women who also were part of his own party. They could overlook that because of their own biases. And so I'm not convinced that if it's enough people, because there is a such thing as in our society, we basically always bend to the tyranny of the 51%. But it doesn't mean that the other 49% of people stop existing and stop operating in the world just because the tyranny of the 51% won out in any given situation. Whether you side with the 51 or the 49, you still live with those people in the world at the end of the day. And that is something to take into consideration, that you don't always actually win just because you got it done on paper.
Right. Well, I feel like that is a good sum up and way to end the episode.
Did we come to a consensus? Did the villains win? Are we living in a world where the villains have already won?
Yes and no.
Some have won.
Would you argue that in terms of people in positions of power, do we have more villains or people who aren't villains?
This is going to spark a whole.
I think that's hard to say. Yeah, I think that's hard to say to kind of sum up, because it's not really a yes or no. I feel like some yes and some no.
Are you comfortable with the number of villains that we have that have won?
No.
Yes. Yin and yang.
Wow.
Yin and yang.
So you think? Oh, so Romina, your answer is that there's balance in the Force, that we have proportionate Sith to Jedi ratio.
Yes, I do actually believe that.
You think that we have balance in the Force? Okay, so we could make an argument, by the way, that whether you
we're not making an argument. We're trying to wrap up the episode.
I know we're wrapping up, and I won't keep us too long. I know. I won't keep us too long. This won't go to another half hour, but I do know I want to propose something. Because we said that good. We said, well, no, your ladyship, I will allot myself as much time as I might consume. So the thing that I want to put into your head here is that We often reduce things to the simplistic view of good and evil when the more accurate idea might be, since that's super subjective, is to look at balancing things as the opposing forces of order and chaos. I think that order and chaos probably are the more honest way to look at the dichotomy of what we're talking about, meaning that people who sometimes use their cleverness or cunning to subvert or even break rules are operating in the spectrum of chaos. It's not always about whether what they did was morally correct, because you could shift that based on your point of view or based on your bias, based on your echo chamber. You could decide that you're okay with that because it was your guy or your gal, or because of the results, the ends justifying the means, like we've talked about before. But that means that you're willing to entertain chaos if it still gets you to the same place you want to go versus order. But if you decide that you're all in on chaos, then that's part of your alignment, versus someone who might be rigidly based in order isn't necessarily good. Someone who's willing to keep to the rules and keep to the code and keep to the law, even at the expense of good, earnest, innocent people suffering because you refuse to break your rules because you refuse to break your code, and it doesn't do anyone any good. Does that therefore make you good just because you held to your code if the results are horrible for everyone else? Because then you're self-serving. So you see what I'm saying? If we look at things from the spectrum of order and chaos, that's probably a more honest point of view when we're looking at things. Because if we have to deal in morality, we get to debate forever who's a hero and who's a villain. And it's all about where we personally stand in our biases and what's good or bad for us.
I've been watching a TV show called The 100. I know. And it talks a lot about like that problem of like what makes a good leader, because like one of the big things is the leader finds out that she has to make like tough decisions that make her a bad person, and it's kind of like,
but it's for the good of everybody else.
Yeah, it's like for the
You're talking about Clark, by the way.
Yeah. So it's kind of weird because I feel like it relates to that a lot. 'Cause she goes through that process of realizing like, oh, I'm terrible, but I did it for the good of.
Like when they decided to call her the commander of death.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, you made that horrible decision to, kill all those people in the mountain and everything like that. And we're like, oh, you're the god of death now. Like, but like, I'm just a girl trying to do my best.
I think she's like a perfect example of why there's no like just good or bad, because you kind of have to be both.
Clark is, for example, what I would consider a lord of order. She's willing to do horrible things to preserve order and unity and essentially protect the human race. She's willing to do horrible things in order to maintain that order, that greater good. Whereas other people are willing to interject chaos to get what they personally want, regardless of the greater good. So what she's fighting against is not necessarily bad people, evil people, but people who are more, she's thinking of the big picture macro of what's the best net result for the most amount of people? How do I balance the scales here? Whereas people are thinking about their individual, what's good for them in the moment and what they care about. And they're not wrong either. Their motivations are just different, and they're willing to interject chaos and to go against order, rules, their command, their structure, the rules of their society in order to do what they think and believe is right based on what they want to live with or what they want to see happen. Yep. Order versus chaos.
Speaking of things that Audrey is watching, have you watched anything else on the list? On the famous list of things that you
Back to the Future. I watched
all three of them.
Even though only one was on the list. And other than that, I haven't. Whoops.
I see. Okay. Well, I guess we'll talk about that in next week's episode.
That could be interesting.
It could be interesting. Do you have an outro, Roberto?
I'm going to think of it. So here's a question for you while I think of the outro. Romina and Audrey, are you agents of order or chaos?
Romina, I think I know what you're gonna say. Wait, we should guess for each other, Romina.
Okay. I'm gonna say that
Roberto's chaos. We know this.
No, I'm a lord of
for
order.
you.
I'm a lord of order.
He's the ruthless lord of order.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm lawful evil or lawful good. It's either one. I'm fine, but I'm still lawful. I'm still a lord of order.
I'm gonna say Audrey is also order.
Romina, are you chaos?
Roberto, what's your guess?
I think that you like the idea of being an agent of chaos, and I think that your mind tends to work in that way, but I feel that your alignment is that you would, in fact, choose the greater good more often than not.
Yeah,
I think you would
agree.
choose the greater good of the macro, the big picture, versus indulging in what other people around you might think is a good idea or what they want. You would look at the big picture and think about what really is going to happen, what those consequences are.
Okay. I'll allow it.
I think that you would pick being right over I think that you would pick being vindicated and being correct over being
Yes.
universally liked and praised and
Yeah.
being proven to have made the correct decision long term
Right.
than the short term accolades of doing what people want and pandering to them.
That sounds about right.
By the way, I'm not downing anybody who, by the way, cares deeply about what people around them want. Most people in society are that way. But again, that's also sometimes thinking in the moment and living in the moment, which sounds good, but also those things add up too. So what they add up to and whether that's a good choice is a to be determined thing. Same thing for people who pick long term, but never get to the finish line. So it's a to be determined. It's like, oh, you had all those plans and where did it get you? Like, so the Joker, I think, said that. So
You know what else is to be determined?
Balance.
The outro.
yes. All right. I think I've got it.
Is that balancing on there, or is it like a?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. I was like, what? I was like, is that a mammoth ring? Like, I was
For those of you who are just listening and don't have the visuals, I currently have a very tiny mammoth on my pinky. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
You're missing out.
All right. I think I've got.
That looks painful.
I think
For
I've
me or the
got
mammoth?
I think I've got my outro.
All right, we're ready.
All right. Thank you for listening to the No Assembly Required podcast, a podcast where we talk about nothing, filmed in front of a live YouTube audience. No audience members were harmed in the filming of this podcast, only our dubious nature with morality. And now, signing off, your host. Well, actually, signing off your host, since we all decided that we are apparently lords of order now. Romina the Redeemed, Audrey the Angel Ember, and your morally gray Lord of the Interwebs, Roberto Blake. Thank you for listening to the No Assembly Required podcast. Please rate and review in Apple and listen to us in Spotify if you so desire, and all places that podcast may be consumed. Thank you for listening. Join us again on Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time-ish, also called Roberto Standard Time, and we will regale you with more tales of entertainment, more banter, debates, and making you think the world is doomed. Thank you for listening. NARP.